Alright, so in this lesson what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the Cloud Effects shelf tools. And if you don't see them up here on your shelf, up here where it says Cloud Effects, just go into your little plus icon right here, go down the shelves, and then go down to Cloud Effects. Right there, the third one down. And the benefit of using this Cloud Effects shelf is it does a lot of the setup work for you, so you don't have to actually create all this stuff from scratch. So we did it a bit of a manual way. This is going to be basically off-the-shelf tools. It's a little bit different than the workflow that I use. I still kind of use the setup that I showed you guys first because I find that it gives a lot more detailed results. But these shelf tool is great because it's easy and super straightforward. So I'll start off by just creating a sphere, and we'll dive inside of here, and then we'll just go ahead and set these settings up. So radius we'll just do 3, 1, and 3. So we get that nice oval shape that we have been using. And now what I'm going to do is just go over to my cloud effects, and we essentially got two different setups. We have the cloud rig, which essentially is these first 4 buttons, and then we have the sky rig. The cloud rig, if we hit this, so if I just control, so while I'm out here, if I just hit control, click, it's going to create a couple different things. It's going to create a lighting setup. It's going to create a cloud light in here. A lot of stuff that I don't necessarily end up using. So what I'm going to do here is just delete all this stuff and just use these two, the second and third button right here. So while we're inside of our sphere object, I'm just going to rename this to be Cloud Shelf. And to start, what I'm going to do is select my sphere and then just control click cloud. And that'll throw down a very, very basic volume. And you can see very simple controls. We have the density that's built in. We have the uniform sampling that's built in. We have simple things like scatter shape. The really, really cool thing about this is that we can fill the source. And what this is going to do is very similar to what we were doing before while we were scattering things inside the volume and then scattering spheres around it, or doing the scale, the randomized scale. It's going to do a lot of that for us. It's not going to be the exact same result, but it still is going to give us at least some sort of like random start to play with. And we can play with the seed here. We can play with the shape size. So go up from 0.2 to 0.5. It's going to look a lot more poofier. We have a scale multiplier that just simply multiplies those scales. We have a noise min and noise max. So this is very similar to how we were setting that up with the fit range. So we can go higher and lower with that. And then, of course, there's secondary shapes too. So before I go into the secondary shapes, I'm just going to go over to my volume tab and do uniform sampling up to something like 100. That's just to give us some more details to work with. We can actually go a little bit higher, like 150. And you can see how much faster this is working than the ISO offset already. Put in 150 samples in here on the ISO offset would be pretty slow. So before we move any forward, I'm just going to drop down a light so we can see what we're doing a little bit more. So over in our lighting tab right here, we're going to control click on our area light. That's just to give us some shape so I can dive back inside of there. Now we can unlock that and then rotate down and we can see this a little bit more. So scatter shapes. So fill source goes from like oval to being this little randomized sphere. And then what we can do to randomize this on top of that is before we throw down that cloud is we can just throw down a mountain and just really crank up the height just to really make it organic. And we can always go the element size, we can kind of push that a little bit bigger and really push this so we can get like a broad stroke. So here I'll just leave this off. Height 5 and element size 5. And then what we can do is throw on another mountain, which can serve as our high frequency details. So we have macro details and our micro details, and we can plug this in there. And now we can see we're starting to get a lot more of a random shape here. And I'm just going to go ahead and shut off my grid here and go into my display options. Go ahead and turn off my background color scheme. Going to make this dark so we can see this a little bit better. Cool. So from here, if we look on the secondary shapes, if we go ahead and click that on, we'll start to see that it's going to scatter things on top of these volumes as well. So you can see we have a bunch of micro details that are starting to show up, which is really cool stuff. Cool. So we can visualize as polygons. So there's a lot of really good stuff in here that we can you take advantage of. Great. So from here, what we can do is we can go next up on our cloud shelf. So we have cloud, and then we have cloud noise. So this is going to be very similar to our volume VOP that we made, but this time it's just going to be one node that we have to work with. So we have our noise tab, and we have our amplitude. We have things like, if we go up on this, we can make this a lot more noisy. So it's 0.2, 0.36 on there. So we're starting to get a lot more breakup there. And then we can always play with the element scale as well. So element size, if we go lower, so we do 0.2, we can go up to 1. So we can have 1 set up for our broad strokes. So if I just do something like element size 3, and we do amplitude 1, we can start to really kind of break up that initial shape. We'll see how this turns out. Cool. So now what we're seeing is a much more organic shape. So right now it's just kind of like that oval shape, but now much more organic. I'm gonna lower this to something like 0.5 so it's not so extreme. And then what we can do is we can start adding cloud noises on top of this. So we can do cloud noise. And now this can be our micro details. So if I do something like 0.1 or go from 0.1 to 0.2, we can start to see a little bit more breakup here. And if we want to tweak our density, we can always just go back up here to our cloud, go over to density. It's all built into this stuff, so we don't have to actually create this stuff manually. We can switch this over to like 1. The downside of this, you can see that, obviously it's going to have to recook all these nodes. So it's a little bit slower workflow. Anytime you have a setup like this where it's built in a way where it gives you a lot of parameters by default, instead of building them step by step, essentially what you're doing is you're essentially pre-setting yourself up for a ton of calculations. So it is going to be a lot slower than working with the workflow that we had before. And you can kind of see this if we double click on this. You can see that this is just, a node that's built up of other nodes. And of course, doing this much of the calculation has a ton of volume VOPs in here, a ton of stuff that just kind of will slow you down for sure, but it's a really good tool in the sense that you don't have to do much. And we can always do stuff like if we want to start adding stuff to this, so we can do volume VOP at the very bottom here, and we can throw down this for our density. So similar to what we were doing before, we can throw down a multiply in here. So we'll do multiply, go ahead and drag and drop down middle, click on this parameter. And it's going to shut off because it's defaulting to 0. So we'll set that to 1. And you can see now that we're doing it at the end, and we did this a little bit manually, it's a lot faster to tweak this. And of course, if we wanted to, we can even add like our noises and stuff on top of this. So we can start mixing and matching the cloud shelf tools, and of course our manually setup that we've already learned how to do. All right, so next up we'll take a look at the sky rig right here. So I'll start by just creating a box. And I'll dive inside of here and I'll just make the box size a value of 0.5. And then what we'll do is we'll jump back out we'll go to the objects level. We'll just name this sky. And then what we'll do is we'll go to Cloud Effects and control click Sky Rig. I'll drop in a light. So control click that. And then from there, we'll take a look at this. And you can see right out of the box, we're getting a pretty decent looking setup. It's looking like a cloudscape. And what's really cool about this is it's got all this stuff built in. So we want to do voxel size. If we want to do like 0.0075 to get something a little bit more detailed, that's pretty easy to do. If we go over to density, same kind of controls. So we can go less, we can go up, we can go a little bit more. All that stuff is built in. Makes it a lot more intuitive when you're working with this. And we can always add things on top of this after that. If we go over to noise, this is going to be our main controls to control how much noise we have. So if we do like noise amplitude, if we do 0, it'll essentially turn it off. If we go up to 1, it'll, there we go. Essentially expand that out. Element size, so if we change this to something like 0.01, we'll get something very, very micro. And if we go up to something like 1, we'll get some more macro details. So just by changing the slider right here, we can dramatically change how this cloudscape is going to work. We have noise roughness, which is going to control how smooth those edges. So this can be a really good thing to kind of layer on top of each other. So you can have one smooth cloud setup, and then on top of this you can essentially duplicate it. So to kind of show you that, I'll just kind of do an example of that to kind of show that. So we can do like one layer like this, which can be like another layer of the atmosphere, and then we can essentially do another sky. Go ahead and plug that in. And now we have one detailed one, and then we have one that's a little bit less detailed. And then we can always just merge those in. Just like that. And now if we just transform one or the other up or down, so we'll do transform. We'll go ahead and move this one down. Whoops. So move this down. Whoops. So I'll just move that down a little bit, and then we'll merge. And now we're starting to get a lot more different layers going on. So we get some really, really good results right out of the box. And just by coming up here to my box, what I can do is just scale this up a little bit. So we can go 3, and then 3. So my X and Z are being scaled up. It's going to take a little bit longer to cook because we do have a lot more detail that we're laying out. Great. But now as we zoom out, we can see that it's looking really detailed. And we can come back down here to our transform and kind of just move this up or down like that. And we can really start to see those layers interacting with each other. Cool. So that wraps up that episode. I'll save this out. This will be our chapter 6, cloud effects shelf.